Chair now yields 5 minutes to Mr. Kim.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the three of you to come on out here. Colonel Krummrich, I want to start with you. We talked a lot about the Doha Agreement. You were talking about how the 7 conditions, 6 were not met. But I want to just kind of start by taking a step back. Did you agree with the approach of starting those negotiations with the Taliban to start with? There was a lot of controversy about that. Should we be engaged in negotiations directly, unilaterally with the Taliban without the government of Afghanistan at the table? What were your thoughts about that?
I think it's clear that when you do 20 years of war, you have to find an end. It starts with open conversations, and it starts with having those open channels of communication with the Taliban. I think that was an important step. I think it was something that needed to begin so that we could then expand it over time to bring in all the parties that were relevant to the situation. So
you supported the idea of starting with the Taliban without the government of Afghanistan in there and then trying to see if you can bring in the other parties. Is that correct?
In my written statement, I was clear. I'm a realist. I know that this has to end at some point. It's really, when you control the how and the when, you have to be very methodical and deliberate about it. If that is an open avenue to begin the process, absolutely.
Was it a good deal? Was the Doha Agreement a good deal?
On paper?
Yeah.
Sure, but the Doha Agreement is worthless if you can't get both parties to do what is required. We operated in good faith to our detriment, and more importantly, the detriment of the Afghan people.
When you were talking about the challenges in 2021, you were talking about how they were just tactical. If I remember correctly, you were saying that tactically, trying to organize a withdrawal in the spring and the summer is just not a good tactical effort. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Well, would you then extend that to the timeline set out in the Doha Agreement? The Doha Agreement was agreed to in February. 14 months later, if conditions were met, that there would be a withdrawal, so that would bring it to May 2021. Was that sort of a flaw then in the document to start with?
No, I think if we got to May of 21 and the conditions were met, which is critical, then the stage would have been set. Did you for a responsible withdrawal?
You've talked very deeply about your distrust of the Taliban. Did you have a belief that those conditions actually could have been met, all 7 conditions, realistically?
We wouldn't get into this conversation if we didn't believe that there was a chance. The problem, and I think Colonel Kolenda hit it too,
so you thought realistically there was a chance that the Taliban would agree to all 7 conditions?
We wouldn't have put them out there if they hadn't. I mean, you've got to take a leap of trust to say, look, we're going to give you the opportunity to do it. The conditions-based portion.
Even if you take a leap of trust, I mean, have some sense of contingency and setting that kind of timetable up front of May. Look, I mean, you talked about how there haven't been these conditions met. I agree with you. There were not the conditions met. And if I heard you correctly, you said we should not have started troop withdrawals and reductions unless the conditions were met. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. So I just want to make sure. So then the withdrawals that happened, on October 7th, the reductions to less than 5,000, Trump saying we should try to have the troops home by Christmas. So you would disagree with those decisions as well?
I think there was prudent steps taken when we saw the conditions weren't being met, when we began our troop withdrawals, and then we saw that there was no intention of the Taliban to actually follow these. At that point, General Milley and other senior leaders talked to the president, and they halted the withdrawal at that point to make sure that we were making sure that the conditions were driving the decisions.
Yeah. Colonel Kolenda, I want to bring you in on this. I mean, I hear what I'm just trying to tease out here is that, and I think you kind of really hit the nail on the head. Just these were systemic problems across the board over 20 years, 4 administrations, 2 presidents of either party. I mean, we recognize there were problems and mistakes that were made leading up to the withdrawal, but also going backwards. Would you agree with that kind of statement there?
In February 14th of 2018, the Taliban issued an open letter to the American people saying they wanted talks. And I agree with my colleague that we've got an obligation, fighting a just war, to explore those opportunities. Now, you negotiate to secure your interests, not to give them away. And the Doha Agreement seemed to make an agreement trading no U.S. troops for promises of no terrorism. And then there was no accountability. So there was no single person who was able to, below the President of the United States, who was able to say, the Taliban are in material breach, we're stopping the withdrawal, and we are resuming military operations against them. Nobody had that authority. And again, it's this silo problem.
Yeah.
And a related problem is that the State Department does not have any body of expert knowledge on how to conduct wartime negotiations in which the United States is an active participant. This is a major shortfall in the State Department's body of knowledge. It's a major shortfall in our national security thinking, and one of the common sense reforms that we can make to prevent something like this from happening again.
Great, thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Kim. I find it an amazing leap to think that President Trump, Obama, or Bush are responsible for what happened in the literal withdrawal of Afghanistan, but everybody's entitled to their opinions. I now yield to Mr. Waltz for 5 minutes.